following on neatly from the earlier discussion, Minister, student poverty last year was rampant, accommodation being a key element of it, public transport, and just now all the cost of living issues are going to hit students. And my question is, what are you going to do about that? And will you consider bringing in free public transport for everybody in higher education? And what are we going to do to bring down the cost of accommodation? There should be subsidies for student accommodation.
Thank you, Deputy Boyd Barrett. Following the establishment of my department as Minister, I have really tried to place a focus on how we have an affordable higher and further education system and what we do to reduce, not just what we do to address the sustainable funding of the sector, but what we actually do to reduce the cost to students and families. This has, I think, been demonstrated by a broad range of initiatives that we've already introduced and more that we're planning. So, for example, we've seen over 43,600 students already approved through the student grant scheme for the college year starting in September. But we've also seen a very important body of work done and commissioned by my department, which is the review of the SUSI student grant scheme. This has made a number of recommendations on issues including the rates of the grant, the income thresholds, the eligibility criteria and postgraduate support. I want to inform the House it's absolutely my intention to progress measures to reduce the cost of education for families and for students through improvements to the student grant scheme. I am pleased to say we've started that work. We made the first changes to SUSI undergraduate grant rates and eligibility thresholds in a decade, as well as changing the non-adjacency rules to benefit students who are commuting. Students can now earn also up to €6,552 during non-term time in 2022 without being concerned as to how that will affect their eligibility for a grant. That is another change we introduced. On the 4th of May, I launched the Funding for Future framework, and this sets out how we intend to reduce the cost as a barrier to education in the context of budgets. And let me be very clear, in that context, I want to see the student contribution in higher education reduced in a meaningful way. On accommodation affordability, I suppose I've somewhat outlined our answer to Deputy Conway Walsh in relation to that, but we have changed the law in this House. We've changed the law to make sure that a student cannot be asked to pay more than 1 month's rent and 1 month's deposit up front. Students were getting fleeced, being asked to pay 4, 5, 6 months rent up front to secure accommodation. And I will be attending the Cabinet Committee on Housing next week to discuss student accommodation. We've provided laptops to disadvantaged students to try and help tackle the digital divide. It's expected 20,000 students will receive a free laptop under this initiative. The Department of Transport have introduced a new youth travel card which will offer a 50% discount on fares across public transport networks, and we've abolished the PLC levy of €200 as well from September.
These are very, very small changes, Minister. We need to go a lot further, right? And there needs to be a total mindset change. Accessing further and higher education should be seen in the same light as primary or secondary. In other words, we want as many people as possible to access further and higher education as is possible. And therefore, we need to remove all barriers. We have the highest fees in Europe, they should be gone. It's crazy to have registration fees. Only 30% of students benefit from grants. Only 30%. Okay, maybe it's gone up slightly. It's still the vast majority do not get grants. Student accommodation, UCD, the new accommodation is being built, €1,400 a year. Now, even as a temporary measure, we should all third level students not get HAP? I don't really like HAP as a system, but at least it reduces the cost of rent. That's a temporary measure you could bring in for all third level students. And why don't we do what they're doing in Germany? They've reduced public transport fares by 90%. Couldn't we at least give all third level students free public transport or dramatically reduced in the same way as we've now done for school going students?
Thank you very much. Look, I accept there's more that we need to do. I don't accept, though, that everything we've done has been small. I actually think providing free laptops to students, and I hear from students, has made a substantial difference. Hasn't been to 20,000 of the most disadvantaged, and I presume you'd want me to target the most disadvantaged. A 50% reduction in the cost of getting to public transport is a very big step forward, brought in by my colleague Minister Ryan. We've abolished in its entirety the fee for going to do a post-leaving cert course from September, and some students will also see their grants increase by about 20 to 33% as a result of the changes we made against the adjacency rates. But we need to do more, and I'm very encouraged by the fact that the summer economic statement statement this year talks about budget 2023, but also nods very clearly in the direction of measures that will need to be brought in with an immediate impact in 2022 when the budget is announced. And you can be absolutely sure that I've spelled out the policy direction I want to take in that regard, improving student grants further and trying to reduce the registration fee. And I'll be working with government colleagues to see what a package of additional supports for students and their parents and families in this calendar year can look like as part of that budgetary process.
Although these student unions haven't got all the figures, talking to them this morning, they reckon more people dropped out of college last year than ever before because of accommodation costs and the cost of living crisis. That's what their estimate is. In UCC last year, at the beginning of term, there were record numbers of students going to food banks, such that in one report, in 48 minutes, all the food in the food bank was gone. So desperate were the students for food, right? And imagine how much worse it's going to be with the cost of living crisis now. It is unacceptable that students are paying 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 in accommodation costs. It is madness to impose any transport costs on them. We want people to go to college, and we should get rid of fees, full stop. There is no justification for having college fees. We wouldn't do it, well, sorry, except in private schools, of course, they do it in our two-tier education system, but we shouldn't have fees at all for education, second level, third level or primary.
I wouldn't know about the private education system, but no, look, I think, firstly, you can't come in here and just put figures or anecdotes out that aren't backed up by fact. You said 30%, I accept you acknowledge that mightn't be accurate. A lot more than 30% of students receive student grants. The figures from my memory are up about 42%. So that's it's a pretty big increase, though, Deputy. Pretty big increase between 30 and 42%. So that's one point. Yeah, please do. I'll provide you with the figures in writing, and also I'll provide you with the figures in relation to the number of students who didn't complete their third level education this year, because I have no evidence to suggest that, nor do the HEA provide me with any evidence to suggest a very significant increase or an increase in the dropout rate. So let's look at the figures in relation to that. This issue, though, and it's a real issue, by the way, I fully accept it, this issue of the cost of living pressures that people are facing, it is important that students know we have a student assistance fund. You haven't acknowledged that. It has more money in it than ever before, Deputy, €18.5 million, and that is available for students who are struggling to make ends meet, who are struggling with the bill, who have an exceptional payment or an issue they weren't, a bill rather, that they weren't expecting to encounter. That's there in addition to the SUSI student grant scheme. But be clear, I want to improve the grants, I want to drive down the fees, and I intend to be the first minister in a long time to do both.
Thank you. Moving on.